Lyddie, Chapter 17, Part 2. Page 135, 3 paragraphs up from the bottom. She tried not to feel angry at Charlie for not writing to her himself. He had, after all, done the sensible thing. To the law and their uncle, they were only children. Judah would have to listen to Quaker Stevens. He was a man of substance. She was glad to know that Luke had gotten safely home. She had finally realized that the freight he had come to fetch was human. The letter meant, though, that she could wait no longer. Something would have to be done about Rachel. The promised fortnight had passed, and she must go back to work herself on the morrow. She sent Rachel to the bedroom, stuffed the letter in her apron pocket, and went into the kitchen. She didn't start with the request, but with an offer to help to fix dinner. Mrs. Bedloe was always grateful for an extra hand in the kitchen, even though the house was now down to only 20 girls. "You give me more than the fortnight, Mrs. Bedloe, and I am obliged," she said. Once the cabbage had been chopped and the bread sliced. "You were near to death, Lyddie. I'm not without heart," said Mrs. Bedloe. "Indeed not," Lyddie smiled as warmly as she knew how. "You've been more good to me and mine, which is why I dare. It won't do, you know. I can't keep her on indefinitely. But if she was a doffer, she's hardly more than a baby. She's small, but she's a worker. Didn't she nurse me, eh? She pulled you through. She pulled you through." "I wouldn't have warranted," said Mrs. Bedloe. "Could you ask the agent for me, just until I got things set with my brother? All I want to do is take her home. It wouldn't be for long, I swear. Meantime, I've not the heart to set her out with strangers." Mrs. Bedloe was weakening, and Lyddie could read it in the sag of her face, and she pressed on eagerly. "It won't be more than a few weeks, and I'd pay extra. I would. I know it's hard for you with only 20 girls here regular." I'll speak to the agent, but I can't promise you." "Oh, I know. But if you'll just ask for me, she's a fine little worker and so eager to make good." I can't promise anything." "Would you go now and ask?" "Now? I'm in the middle of fixing dinner." "Oh, I'll finish for you, please, so I can take her over when I go back to work tomorrow." It was arranged. Lyddie suspected that Mrs. Bedloe had added a few years and several pounds in her description of Rachel to the agent, but a skeptical look was all she got from the overseer on the spinning floor when she presented Rachel for the work in the next morning. And Rachel looked so bright and eager and smiled so sweetly that even the skeptical look melted, and she was sent skipping down the aisle to meet the other doffers under the care of a kindly middle-aged spinner. Slowly, Lyddie climbed the flight of stairs to the weaving room. Her worry for Rachel had pushed aside for a time her own fears of seeing Mr. Marston again. She didn't dare look in his direction, but went straight to her looms, where Bridget was already at work cleaning and oiling. "You're looking much rosier," Bridget said. How pretty the girl was with her light brown hair and her eyes clear blue as a bright February sky after snow. It was the smile, though, that transformed her into a real beauty. Lyddie smiled back. She did not envy other women their good looks, and even if she had been so inclined, she would never begrudge this bounty of nature to one so poor in everything else. "We covered the machines as best we could while you were gone, me and Diane, though," she smiled apologetically, "you'll see from your wages the work was not near what it would be had you been here." It was all they had time to say before Mr. Marston stepped on his stool and pulled the cord that set the room to roaring and shaking. Lyddie jumped, then laughed. How quickly she'd forgotten the noise. Within minutes she had settled in and forgotten everything else. Mr. Marston, her weakness, the farm, Charlie, even Rachel. It was good to be back with her beast again. She belonged among them somehow. By the breakfast bell, she was almost too tired to eat. She would, if she could have chosen, sat out the break in the window alcove, but that would leave her alone on the floor. She glanced at Mr. Marston and hurried toward the stairs. He didn't speak to her. It was as if nothing had occurred between them, except that he never came over to her loom to pat and encourage her. Not once. She managed to eat breakfast, or some of it. Rachel was stuffing herself like a regular factory girl, talking excitedly at the same time. She stopped only to look at Lyddie and say through her full mouth, "Eat, Lyddie. You've got to eat and grow strong. So So it was, she got through breakfast and dinner, but by supper she could only manage a few bites of stew before she dragged herself up to bed. Fatigue was like a toothache in her bones. She would have cursed her weakness had she the strength. Each day, though, she was a little stronger. At first she could not feel it, no more than a body can feel itself grow taller. But by the end of the week she found that she had eaten a full plate at supper and was lingering in the parlor with Rachel, who was watching, fascinated, as a phrenologist sought to sell his services to the girls. "Please, Lyddie," Rachel begged, "let's have our heads done." "I know about my head, Rachel. Why should I pay good money to find out it's plain as sod and stubborn as a mule? And such a skinflint. A penny would freeze to your fists before you'd spend it," the phrenologist snapped. "I give you the reading for free, not that there's hope you'd pay." The other girls in the parlor tittered. Even Lyddie tried to smile, but Rachel was indignant. "She's not mean. She's going to buy me ribbons," she declared. "Come on, Lyddie," she added, taking her hand. "Let's go read the book you brought me." The girls laughed, but more gently. They had never cared much for Lyddie, whom they knew to be close with her money and her friendships, but Rachel was rapidly becoming their pet. How dry her life had been before Rachel came. It was like springs of water in the desert to have her here. She kissed her head that night before she tucked her in. "You don't think your Lyddie is a cheap old spinster, eh?" Rachel was furious all over again. "You're the best sister in the world." Lyddie blew out the candle. She lay listening to Rachel's even breathing and heard in her memory the sounds of birds in the spring woods. If only she could hear from Charlie. Lyddie's happiness would be complete. The money was growing again. She had nearly caught up with the wages lost by her illness, and even though Rachel made only a pittance, it paid her room and board. She had seldom been happier. She woke in the night puzzled. She thought she had heard Betsy again, that wretched hacking sound that soared through her ribcage straight into her heart. And then she was wide awake and knew it to be Rachel. It was only a cold. Surely it was nothing. She would be over it in a week, since the child seemed bright-eyed and lively as ever. If she were sick, really sick, Lyddie kept the knowledge of the night cough tight inside herself, but the fear grew like a tumor. She began to lie awake, listening for the awful sound, until finally she knew she must send the child away, anywhere, just so she was not breathing this poison air. "It will break my heart to send the child away," Lyddie could not bear the thought. "It might break Rachel's heart as well. She has been sent away too often in her short life. Look, she dotes on me, tough and mean as I be. She clings to me more than she ever did our mother. She needs me." Lyddie did not know what to do, and she was too terrified to ask. No one must know. She fed Rachel the pills Bridget had brought her. She had no faith in them, but she must try. She fixed plaster for the child's chest, trying to turn it into a game, desperate to hide her own terror. And she was succeeding, wasn't she? Rachel seemed happy as ever and carefree as a kitten. Caught in a spasm of coughing, she made light of it. "Silly cough," she said. "All the girls have them." Lyddie mustn't worry. Summer was here. The weather was warm, and Rachel would be over it soon. They'd take July off, go back to the farm, the two of them. But it was a vain dream, Lyddie knew. There would be nothing to eat there. The cow was gone, and no crops planted. Truphania. She would send Rachel to Truphania. But Truphania meant Mistress Cutler as well as that lonely, airless attic. How could she do to Rachel at 8 what her mother had done to her at 13? It had been hard even then, and so very lonely. She hadn't realized how lonely until now that she was no longer alone. Then one evening in late June, she had just read Rachel to sleep. Tim knocked on the door. "A visitor for you, Lyddie," he said, in the parlor. And that is the end of chapter 17. Keep on reading.